So my title is Misused and Underused, Revelation's Untapped Potential, because I like this book. I favor it. I do think it has untapped potential, and that will hopefully I will be able to show that. I'm hoping that at least. So I will begin here with my own studies at the University of St. Andrews that started quite late in my life. And I won't get into the details of what put me on that path, but I had some ideas and I had some things that I wanted to pursue for my own sake and not because I was dissatisfied with my profession. I wasn't seeking a new career. I just had some interests. And when I came to St. Andrews, I had two very amazing mentors. I had Bruce Longenecker, who is now at Baylor, and I had Richard Bauckham, who is one of the most highly regarded New Testament or biblical scholars in the world, and certainly in the English-speaking world. And they were both there, and I had wanted to go to St. Andrews because of Richard Bauckham. So St. Andrews has an old university, one of the oldest universities in the UK, and it has a very upscale history. This was the city of John Knox and the Scottish Reformation in its time. It is known as thought of as the cradle of golfing. One of the most famous golf courses in the world is there at St. Andrews. And I'm very happy to say that I don't golf because I might have gotten distracted. But I do run. And I have run along here in this lower picture in the lower right hand on that along that sandy beach, along many kilometers, many miles of beaches and sand dunes there outside of St. Andrews. And I had a problem there because I had some ideas about my project and what I would write on, and it wasn't exactly to my mentors or my advisors' liking at the beginning. So I will present this as through that experience I had, you might say. So I changed the title here a little, Misused and Underused. And now, Three Forks on the Road to Understanding. Three forks in the road that I would like to discuss with you. They will be based on my two books. The one on the left is Saving God's Reputation, which was my dissertation at St. Andrews. And the second one is my Paideia New Testament commentary that I would not have been asked or given the task to write that except for my dissertation and my advisor, Bruce Longenecker, who is one of the editors of the Paideia New Testament commentary series. So these two books will figure, but just as a background, this is part of my journey. So the first fork in the road is here. I hope my slide explains it. I hope you can see it's a fork in the road. And you see on one side there is Roman, and on the other side there is cosmic. So should Revelation be read mostly as a kind of critique of Roman imperial reality? Or should we say that its horizon is cosmic and not only Roman? So at the time when in academia today, and at the time when I came to St. Andrews, and still today, the Roman horizon is very dominant in Revelation academia. And the cosmic horizon is more seen as a kind of backdrop, amplifying, hyperbole, something like that. And I thought that I am going to make the cosmic perspective the main thing. And the Roman perspective, it isn't absent, of course. That will be secondary. That will not be primary. So the figure on the horse there used to be the Emperor Domitian, the person who was the emperor at the time when the Revelation is thought to have been written toward the end of the 1st century. But the face of the equestrian, the face of the rider there is not Domitian, because his successors, those who took over, they like to erase the traces of their predecessors. So they chopped off his head and put the head of Nerva, the emperor immediately following Domitian. So this is used to be Domitian, but now it is Nerva. But the fork in the road, you see what it is. Is it Roman, or should we go cosmic? So the Roman Empire was amazing. It was an imposing reality by any sort of criterion we might have. And here are some things projected. There is a triumphal arch there. I think that one is from Septimius Severus, but it projects power. And the altar in the middle there is the Ara Pacis from the time of Augustus, the first Roman emperor. And this was a way to, it was public imagery, a public narrative, as it were, projecting peace and stability. And here is a detail on the right from that altar, and you can see that the imagery is ironic. It projects prosperity, peace, fecundity, you name it. And here is just one quotation from one of the people who has studied the use of images and the power of images in the age of Augustus, Paul Zanker. Here is what he says. Most importantly, through visual imagery, a new mythology of Rome, and for the emperor, a new ritual of power were created. Built on relatively simple foundations, the myth perpetuated itself and transcended the realities of everyday life to project onto future generations the impression that they lived in the best of all possible worlds, in the best of all times. So that is the messaging in Rome. The messaging where there is a combination of religion and politics, because the emperor is also a priestly figure. And after his death, most emperors were voted divine honors. So they were seen as emperors ascending to heaven, such as in this image here. That is from Ephesus, I believe. And it is showing the journey to heaven of the emperor Lucius Verus, who was one of the emperors in the second half of the 2nd century. So these are the realities. It's not like the Roman Empire isn't big. It is not like it didn't have formidable aspirations, including a religious aspiration. So, and this sort of public narrative is a popular one because we know it from all our times too. I'm sure China today is trying to inculcate that kind of narrative. Russia certainly is, and no one does it better than America. The notion that we live in the best of all possible worlds in the best of all times. So that was the Roman situation. Now, I think that is too small for the aspiration of revelation, and that the cosmic horizon is really the correct one and not the Roman one. But so I say this by way of an assertion, and I will try to support it or say something in its support. Let me go to this text in Revelation chapter 4. After this, I saw, And look, a door stood open in heaven. And the first voice which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet spoke to me again, saying, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." Now, so John is taken into a world, a kind of a world beyond human reality, beyond human history, and this is common to happens in other apocalypses too, apocalypses that are not in the Bible, but the way this is done in the book of Revelation is in my view quite unique. And now I will show you, and I will show you quite a few of these illustrations from Anglo-French apocalypses. I have now been collecting some of those from several years, and I think they have pedagogical value. I think they give pictorial representations that are exegetically valid, that are not just, oh, fun to look at. They are actually very useful, and I will show you one here. This is from the Trinity Apocalypse. This is not a painting that hangs on the wall. These are pictures painted inside books published in the 13th century. 11th, 12th, 13th century was the heyday of these Anglo-French apocalypses. This is the Trinity Apocalypse, and it is in the possession of Oxford University in the UK. And this is actually the one that is most exquisite, the Trinity Apocalypse. So here on the left side, can you see my arrow? Do you see my arrow when I move my arrow? So here is a voice speaking French. They must have been speaking French in the UK at the time, saying, "Come up here," in French. And it is like a voice of a trumpet. So the imagery is quite precise, saying to John down here, "Come up here, I will show you what will happen," and so on. And then the scene that he will be shown is the heavenly council with the four living creatures. Let's see, I'm sorry, here, 1, 2, 3, 4 in those corners, and the 24 elders. It's a picture of the heavenly council, the scene that greets John. And I just wanted to magnify the voice that tells him to come up here, because we are now in a cosmic setting. And in that cosmic setting, they aren't just interested in the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire has interest more maybe to humans, maybe somewhat less to heavenly beings and to the heavenly council. So I will use that as a kind of entry wedge for the notion that we need to have a cosmic perspective. So there is something called the Miles Law. I wonder if he was British or if he was American. I think he might have been British. Rufus Edward Miles. Maybe he was American. Maybe one of you know the answer to that. I should have looked it up. But he said something that seems to be quite true. Where you stand depends on where you sit. That is to say, your setting, your context will influence your perspective, your opinions. Where you stand in relation to this or that issue depends on where you sit. And this is a reason why many of our opinions are determined by the setting where we live, including our political preferences too. So this is just basic sociology, but it is extremely important in relation to Revelation. And it's, in my view, the reason why the cosmic perspective has lost out. So let me use a few more of these Anglo-French apocalypses to make this point. This is the Cambrai apocalypse, and I have almost 100 of these. They are quite amazing. They are not quite as fancy as the Trinity one, but here we see the heavenly council again, and we see the four living creatures, and we see the 24 elders, and we see John here. And they have spatially separated him from the heavenly council. He stands outside the main frame. And this is what I think that means. The primary audience for what we read about in Revelation is the heavenly audience. It is the heavenly council. Something is afoot in the heavenly council that needs to be addressed and is addressed. And John is present to these proceedings in a secondary sense, as a secondary audience. The book of Revelation is a message to us, but secondarily, we are privy to insights that are shown, first of all, in the setting of the heavenly council. I think the artist here did a good job. This is from the Deuce Apocalypse. That one is in the Bodleian Library at Oxford. And here again, we see that there is a certain standardization to the way these scenes are represented, but we are now quite at home with this, aren't we? We see the four living creatures, and we see that something, the throne, I suppose, in the middle, and we see the 24 elders. And if you count them, the number is exactly that. And again, we see John spatially separated from the heavenly council. He stands on the outside looking in. He is not the primary audience, but he is an important participant in some ways. Here we're back to that again. This is in the setting of the seven seals, Revelation 4:1 to 8:1. Here, the Cambrai Apocalypse, this is the seven trumpets from chapter 8, verse 2, till the end of chapter 11. And again, we see that these presentations, the seals, the trumpets, they are all playing out in the context of the heavenly council, with John as a spectator, spatially separated from what is going on inside. And I am saying this means that there is a cosmic perspective here. So reality is seen from the vantage point of heaven. Miles law. Where you stand depends on where you sit. And this is also useful for how we read Revelation, because the cosmic perspective has in many ways lost out to the Roman or the earthly perspective. Here we are back to the Trinity Apocalypse, and we have John standing again outside the main frame, and we have the heavenly scene, but now we have jumped all the way to Revelation 15, to the Lamb standing on Mount Zion at the bottom, and all the redeemed there. But this scene too, everything that we read in Revelation is actually proceedings in the setting of the heavenly council. So one more thing before I leave this one. Revelation's main revelation is the lamb that is in the middle, the lamb that appears in the middle. And my illustration here is one of the oldest, a more Spanish, French type of illustration, going all the way back to the 9th century. So there was a tradition of representing Revelation pictorially that was extremely robust in those times. And again, the lamb is at the center, and here is the point. The lamb in the middle of the throne isn't just an instrument. He is the main revelation in the book. I saw in the middle of the throne, and in the middle of the four living creatures, and in the middle of the 24 elders, a lamb standing as though it had been killed with violence, having 7 horns and 7 eyes. That is the most pivotal revelation in the book of Revelation, and and the revealer is himself the main revelation. I wish I could say more about it, but we need to move on. So I just want to show that scene here in the Deuce Apocalypse, how that looks, and there are many other illustrations, very, very nice ones. Okay, number 2. So another fork in the road. The first one was Roman or cosmic. The second one is time or name. And I have my terminology here is influenced a bit by Revelation 19, where there is a rider on a white horse, and he has a name that no one knows but himself. And so I want to contrast those things, time versus name, which is more important in the book of Revelation. And I will put it in a little different way. Time, you can say history. Is Revelation's main errand history? Time, or is it theology? Name, knowledge about God. That's another fork in the road, and it has huge consequences for how we read this book. So I have done a series of presentations that you can find on YouTube. I think there is 25 or maybe even 30 presentations under the heading Rereading Revelation. So these are images from Revelation, the ending of the book. There are tears. There is a new earth. There is a city coming down from heaven. There is the healing of the nations. And in chapter 19, there is interest in the name. And in chapter 22, they shall see his face, and his name shall be on their foreheads. So Revelation is, in the ending of the book, there is an interest in the name, in God, and in theology. And there is time. There is a lot about time in Revelation too. These are the options before us. Now, I want to ask you, which one of these should be at the center? Should it be the name? Or here you have the same options again, but I have moved the name out here to the periphery, and I have put time in the center. Should it look like this? Should we have time at the center? So you can say, well, why is he asking that? What's the problem? Well, the problem is that all the schools of interpretation, they have time at the center. That's true for preterism. That's true for futurism. And it's true for historicism. All three of the main so-called schools of interpretation are time-centered. Let me show you this as quickly as I can. Preterism tends to look at the past. Most of the content of Revelation is bound or confined in the time of John, in the 1st century. That's what preterism means, an interest in the past or in things that have happened already. Of course, there is a future there too, but the preterist horizon is really backward looking. Then you have futurism, and futurism is looking to the future, the distant future, the end of all things. That's the futurist perspective on the time in Revelation. And then you have historicism, which is the kind of home of Adventist interpretations. And the historicist looks at all of history, backward and forward, and has a broader scope, you may say. But all of them have in common a prioritizing of time. Let me show you this from another angle. What do they read, these schools? Well, the preterist school, the curriculum in the preterist school is knowledge of the Roman Empire. And the beasts in Revelation 13 is the beast that had a wound there is the Emperor Nero, who was reputed. There was a myth that he would one day come back. So there was the myth of Nero Redivivus, the return of Nero. And that is the preterist horizon. Many of you may not have heard this even, because you haven't acquainted yourself enough with the preterist school. There is a formidable curriculum you need to master to do preterism well. Futurism is somewhat more laid back when it comes to reading curriculum, because it is very much whatever happens now, and there is always something in the futurist scheme from Revelation on current issues. And many people who are futurists, and many people are futurists, they are yearning for some battle of Armageddon now in the part of the world where there is a war as we speak. And then historicism also has quite a demanding curriculum. History, especially church history. And you cannot be a good historicist if you haven't mastered that, because you need to match these that text in Revelation need to be matched to specific historical events. So who are they, these schools? Well, most academic scholars are preterists to some degree. And again, there is a priority for the Roman Empire and for the figure of Nero. In the futurist community, you may say, very few academic scholars are futurists. I say that, you have to qualify it a little, but many evangelical Christians are, and many politicians. You can be sure that the current Speaker of the US House of Representatives is someone who is well versed in futurist eschatology and has a futuristic understanding of the book of Revelation. And in that scheme, there is a literal battle of Armageddon in the Middle East. Seventh-day Adventist interpreters, we have committed to historicist tenets, all of history, especially church history, and especially the history of the Roman Catholic Church. So those are the horizons, and very few people today are historicists. And so most academics, as I said, they are preterists, and then the futurist there in the middle. But look at this one. So here, I could have given you many books, but in Christianity at large, and in America especially, the preterists do not have much influence. The book of Revelation is extremely popular in America, but it is not popular because people believe in preterism, or because they believe in historicism, which Adventists do. It is popular because futurism has a strong influence in America on the way Revelation is read and on American politics. And the Schofield Reference Bible that Donald Harmon Atkinson has written about, the Americanization of the Apocalypse, creating America's own Bible, is quite a worthwhile read. So one tends to look down on futurism, and I do not think much of it. But if you want to assess influence on readings of Revelation, then the futurist reading is the place to go. And it has a huge influence on US politics and US foreign policy as we speak. All the schools of interpretation and where they fail, this is my view. All the schools are time and event centered. All demand expertise, rarely achievable for the ordinary person, maybe with the exception of futurism. All impose a line of demarcation between the expert and the lay reader. It is like we all have to say, we don't understand Revelation, but someone understands it for us. I think that is true for Adventists too, that Adventists in general cannot explain Revelation very well, but we can invite someone to hold a Revelation seminar, and we have the comfort that someone understands this book for us vicariously, we can invite John Pauline or Ranko Stefanovic. People don't usually invite me because I don't do the same reading, but delete that. I am sorry that you have recorded this and I have said it on the record, but let it be. Okay. For all these schools of interpretation, they inhabit communal silos. There are separate approaches confined within separate communities. For some communities, the futurists and the historicists in particular, the interpretation is a major element in the identity of that community, like the Adventist community. Each community knows little about the other communities and might like to keep it that way because it is complicating the picture if we do think about it if we have to go outside our own comfort zone. So here are these silos, and here is what I think about them. I think that all the time-centered interpretations of Revelation are inadequate, they are flawed, that Revelation's main interest is the name and not time. So let's go on. Number 3. Here is the third and the last fork in the road for the interpreter. Is the message of Revelation a message of retribution? Or is it a message of revelation? And I will explain more about the contrast between those two options. And then I will say, so I don't forget it, that most readers of Revelation, 95% at least, maybe 99%, and most Adventist interpretations of Revelation, they stress the element of retribution very much. So in that, if you want to go with the majority here, you go left. If you want to wait a little, wait and see if one should go right here. So let me just give a little background here. Just look outside the community of Revelation scholarships. Just see how this book has been perceived by various competent readers. Here is D.H. Lawrence, who died in 1930 and wrote this just before his death. He is famous for books that Adventists are advised not to read, but he did write a book on Revelation. Just as inevitably as Jesus had to have a Judas Iscariot among his disciples, so did there have to be a revelation in the New Testament. So by that criterion, Revelation is the Judas of the New Testament, because the book of Revelation secures for Jesus betrayal in print. That's what D.H. Lawrence is saying. He says much more than that, but I can't quote it all. Here is Harold Bloom, who is one of the most famous literary critics in the US in his time. And this is what he says. Resentment and not love is the teaching of the Revelation of St. John the Divine. It is a book without wisdom, goodness, kindness, or affection of any kind. Perhaps it is appropriate that the celebration of the end of the world should be not only barbaric, but scarcely literate. So here he faults the book for barbaric theology and very poor. It's a poor composition too. That's his verdict on the book. Here is Carl Gustav Jung, who comments on Revelation in a book he wrote on Job. And this one is also written a while ago. So a veritable orgy of hatred, wrath, vindictiveness, and blind destructive fury that revels in fantastic images of terror breaks out and with blood and fire overwhelms a world which Christ had just endeavored to restore to the original state of innocence and loving communion with God. Revelation is an outlier here. It is perceived to be a message of retribution, and quite an ugly message too, as Jung, who was a colleague and a friend, to at least for a while, to Freud. Here is Nietzsche in a book called The Genealogy of Morals. It's a very interesting book. What, conversely, did the Jews feel against Rome? He thinks that it is an anti-Roman tract. One can surmise it from 1,000 symptoms, but it is sufficient to carry one's mind back to the Johannian apocalypse. That most obscene of all the written outbursts which has revenge on its conscience. And this is a deep element in the way Nietzsche perceived morality, and he sees Revelation as a resentful book. Resentment is all there is to that book from Nietzsche's point of view. Let's do Luther too. I miss more than one thing in this book, and it makes me consider it to be neither apostolic or prophetic. For me, this is reason enough not to think highly of it. Christ is neither known or neither taught or known in it. This is the early Luther. He took a more conciliatory view of Revelation later, because he also discovered that it could be used for anti-Catholic propaganda. But he was not fond of Revelation, needless to say. The man on the picture here is John Collins, who is one of the foremost experts on apocalypses or an apocalyptic literature in our time. And he is married to Adela Yarbrough Collins. Both of them have taught at Yale for many years. Adela is a New Testament scholar and also specifically a Revelation scholar. And in his book, The Apocalyptic Imagination, Collins said, what we find in Revelation is the projection into the future of what was unfulfilled in the past. Jesus did not destroy the wicked in his earthly life, but he would return with supernatural power to complete the task. That is Collins' perception of Revelation. And I wonder, in the American scene, it's different, because all the voices I have quoted so far, at least the ones from the literary world, you might say, they hold it against Revelation that it is violent. They think it gives a poor picture of God. But in the American context, in the futurist perspective on Revelation, the violence of the book is not a problem. It is actually wonderful. It is violence that is celebrated in these books. And there is a popular account, as you know, the Left Behind collection written by Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins. It has sold more than 60 million copies in America. It hasn't sold much in other countries. So this is in some ways a feature of American religion and American views on the book of Revelation. Tens of thousands fell dead, simply dropping where they stood, their bodies ripped open, blood pooling in great masses. There is almost like a kind of a celebratory tenor to these descriptions. I don't think I will read it out loud. You can look at it yourself and see what they say in one of these books. His Glory is Appearing is the title of that book. At St. Andrews, and now living in retirement at Cambridge, there is Richard Bauckham, who has done remarkable work in everything he has done in biblical studies, has had consequences, has been noticed, has had an influence. And so with his view on Revelation, he wrote on Revelation mostly in the 80s and 90s and has moved on to other things. But he says the Apocalypse of John is a work of immense learning, astonishingly meticulous literary artistry, contra Harold Bloom. Remarkable creative imagination, radical political critique, and profound theology. I have quoted that statement many times. I can do it by memory. I think it is really well said. I think it is exactly right what Bauckham says, and it is a way to try to rehabilitate this book and move it away from these more stereotypical ways of reading it that have taken hold, as it were. So here then we are at the end of the three forks on the road to understanding. I have some question marks here, and then the decision. And I think the one that the fork in the road that is most serious is the one you take, whether it is revelation or retribution. That is the main thing. And I have had many arguments with my Adventist, fellow Adventist interpreters of Revelation, because I disagree with them in their way of reading Revelation and preserving the element of retribution in a way that is not exegetically necessary and, in my view, very incorrect. Okay, can I do three quick ones on how to read Revelation? How are we for time now?
No, please keep going. Please keep going.
We can do a little more. So now I want to move to from the three forks in the road to three guideposts for the way. How to read Revelation is just to leave that too here. And I made this slide just a little while ago, so I want to show you my slide. You have to read the road signs carefully to get the point. I'll do it again, one more time. No. So I want to, these are the road signs that I made in this animated slide. Now I want to do them one by one. Number one, the first one, is to become a rereader. Vladimir Nabokov says about all reading, and he also wrote a book that is not on the recommended reading list for Adventists, but he was a very serious literary critic and taught literature in America. Curiously enough, one cannot read a book. One can only reread it. A good reader, a major reader, an active and creative reader is a rereader. Of course, this is a problem in our time because we don't read very much anymore. But this is what he says about reading in general. And about Revelation, one should say, well, that book is for rereaders only. You cannot do it. You cannot read it unless you do it, as a rereader. Let me open this door. Rereaders are welcome. Only rereaders are welcome. And here is the reason. Revelation is symphonic. It demands a sense of the whole in order to make sense of the parts. So that is something that is acquired only by rereading. Number two, pay attention to the Old Testament. I'm quoting Bauckham again. Revelation's use of the Old Testament scriptures is an essential key to its understanding. The pattern of almost continuous allusion to the Old Testament throughout the book is a pattern of discipline and deliberate allusion to specific Old Testament texts. My, oh my, that is huge. And that has been one reason why I have enjoyed my studies of Revelation so much, because I have taken that very seriously. I have taken it probably more seriously than most interpreters in Revelation. I haven't only acknowledged that there are Old Testament texts alluded to in Revelation. I have gone to the Old Testament texts and studied them in their original context to see what they mean before they are adopted by Revelation, you might say. So what does this mean for Adventist interpretations? Well, it means a lot, because the early Adventist interpreters, such as Uriah Smith, he read Daniel and Revelation more like the futurists read these books today. He looked at the day's news. He looked at historical realities in his day. He did look back to early Roman history too, but Uriah Smith and the early Adventist interpreters, they did not pay attention to the Old Testament background. So there is a kind of big hole in the Adventist sort of tradition as far as reading Revelation goes. So John on Patmos is a reader and a seer. He had read the Bible very much, and he was a seer, but the way one perceives him as seer, as a mediator of this revelation, matters. So I will illustrate it here, because the books of the Old Testament that are alluded to in Revelation are not just Daniel. There is Genesis, there is Isaiah, very much from Isaiah, and Daniel, of course, Ezekiel, Zechariah. Most of the books in the Old Testament are in some ways part of the allusions in Revelation. And when John writes, I don't think he did it this way. I just wanted to show you this illustration for the fun of it, that he sits there and writes, and he has an Old Testament next to him, and he has to look up the text. He didn't have to do that. It was very organic. It was very intuitive, and he had full command of it. Another British voice, Austin Ferrer, who I think it is, so who said that, but someone in the UK, maybe it was Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, who said that Austin Ferrer was the most remarkable biblical scholar in the UK in the previous century. So he wrote some very imaginative things, and I want to just quote this one, and we're almost done. No other New Testament author felt himself called to the same task. No other set himself to capture the visionary experience of the last things by an intense and systematic meditation on the whole prophetic tradition. So far from reading like an, let me see there, reading like an attempt to communicate a previous visionary experience, the Revelation reads like a fresh and continuous scriptural meditation, conceived in the very words in which it is written down, as though, in fact, the author was thinking with his pen. A feat not all out of the way, for have we not all done it from time to time, perhaps when we were writing a familiar letter and thinking no faster than we wrote? This is just one way to perceive how this worked in the mind of John when he was writing this, and how the Old Testament, the prophetic tradition, was playing in the background of his mind. The third road sign or a signpost on the way. God is not the only one. And you saw that on my road sign, that God is not the sole actor. This is from Anton Vöckle, a German scholar. God is not the only one who is at work in this world, as the Apocalypse makes so abundantly clear. And this is from a 9th century illustration now belonging to the Wellcome Foundation. And it is the first trumpet. And the illustrator sees the first trumpet and its calamities poured out on the world. And the figures he gives us, what are they? They are demonic figures. It is a demonic reality that comes to light. And that would be true in these also in these Anglo-French apocalypses. It's true for the seals, it's true for the trumpets, it's true for the seven last plagues, if you want to go to that too. So God is not the only one who is at work. And here is another problem that I have with Adventist interpretations, because they tend to collapse agency. What is ascribable and ascribed to demonic agency in Revelation, in the text, is by interpreters made attributed, ascribed to God. So God is the one who is behind these calamities. It is related to the issue of retribution, of course, but here it is as one of my road signs. Okay, I want to review it. Three forks in the road: Roman versus cosmic. I go with cosmic. Time versus name. I go with name. Retribution versus revelation. I go with revelation. And then three guideposts on the way. Become a rereader. Pay attention to John's use of the Old Testament. Indispensable. And God is not the only one who is at work in this world. Thank you for your attention.
Wonderful, Sigve. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to do one more thing, which you didn't. You sort of held back. I'm getting what you believe, but I want to know how we should see Revelation revealing healing qualities about God. Can you be more specific before we go to questions?
Well, of course, my horizon here is narrowed, and I have selected, issues where I differ with others. So it's quite easy. So my first lecture at Loma Linda, because I have lectured for students at Loma Linda about it, is to see Revelation as a vision of healing, and that is what has attracted me to this book from I was little. This chapter 21 and 22. These are all chapters packed with healing imagery. So God is pictured as a healer and a restorer, and there is no question about it. But that impression is in some ways impaired by all the other stuff you have read before you get there, because those things are also attributed to God. So I think one does not escape the need to engage and say who is doing what in this book, and to see that these sequences of calamities in the seals and trumpets and bowls, they are not God's actions in the world. They are revelations of the other side, what the other side is doing. And we have been sending the bill for the world's calamities to the wrong address. And that is true for 95% of interpretations of Revelation.
Good. I think that's a succinct summary of how you do it. And we can go on at great length about specifics. I invite questions. Horace, I see you. And Lauren, can you unmute Horace Alexander for us? Horace, can you proceed with your question? You're on. Go.
Thank you, Gerald. And thank you, Dr. Tonstad, for that really mind-broadening view and different perspectives on Revelation. Now, having had an SDA upbringing, I am predisposed toward the futurist perspective. But there's been something that I've not managed to reconcile in my mind. When Revelation was written, around the year 1995, it was written to the seven churches. These are actual locations in that region of the world. These are actual people being written to because they were under persecution from Domitian. And the very first verse of Revelation 1, verse 1 has the word soon in it. And Revelation 22, the very last chapter, has the word soon, 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 5 times in the last chapter of the book. It says soon. In other words, your redemption, your salvation, your rescue is to come soon. Just hang in there. Now, it so happened that none of this happened for the people to whom it was written. These people died, and it was like 200 years later before there was any relief from persecution when Christianity became the official church of Rome. And so the question that I have is, if it was a failed prophecy for the people to whom it was written, because they would never have seen any fulfillment of it, how do we get from that to say, well, it was a failed prophecy for the people to whom it was written, but for us, it applies to us, and we should have hope that it will be fulfilled for us? How do we get from one point to the other?
Good question, Horace. Sigve, help us.
Yeah, so there are a couple. One thing at least that I need to comment on there. So let's say that Revelation was written during the reign of Domitian. And let's say that it is commonly thought that Domitian was a pretty bad persecutor. But you cannot trust those kinds of stereotypes, because history in the way people wrote history in Roman times, they wrote it for propagandistic purposes. They didn't just describe what actually happened. They made up stuff to make the other ruler, the previous ruler, look bad. There is a wonderful book written by Leonard Thompson, who is one of the great Revelation scholars who had a very good command of Roman imperial realities. And he has written a book called Apocalypse and Empire. And he says that Domitian wasn't a great persecutor. There wasn't much persecution during the reign of Domitian of Christians. There wasn't any more persecution during Domitian's reign than any other ruler at the time. And persecution of Christians was not that much of an issue, not till maybe middle of the 3rd century, certainly at the turn of between in the days of Diocletian and the end of the third and beginning of 4th century, there was serious empire-wide persecution of Christians. But that's one of the big issues. That could be another fork in the road for how one understands Revelation. Some say Revelation is written because there was a crisis, there was persecution. And some, this is two of scholars, two Roman Catholic women scholars, who says, no, there was no crisis. And then that the Revelation is written to create awareness in a time when you are sort of quite laid back. You know, the Laodicean church is not a persecuted church, just to put it in those terms. So before we have a conversation about the stuff that you raise for us, before one does that, one has to see more about the record, about the basic conceptions we have about the time of Revelation and the time it was written. I have doubts that the messages to the 7 churches should be read as specific messages to churches there, because the language used in all these messages is a little bit stereotypical, and I think it is more hyperbolic. So I'm sorry I can't sort of address your question quite to the way you raised it, because I think we have to examine the premise of your question first, and the notion that there was such widespread persecution. Apparently there wasn't.
Thank you. Ed Reichsnyder, you've been chiming away in the chat. You've got some things to say. Let's hear about it, please.
chiming. Nobody's accused me of chiming before.
I like your tune.
So I'm going to say something that will probably meet with disapproval by a majority of folks. I think that the Seventh-day Adventist Church focuses way too much on the book of Revelation. It's a matter of perhaps discerning signs and times, but that's my perspective. We should just spend way too much time on it. It's there. It winds up with the good guys winning, the bad guys losing, and then everybody's in heaven. So it's there. We know that's the outcome. But if God is love, and that's how we perceive God, basically, is through the lens of him being a loving creature. And if God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and if loving God and neighbor is the most important thing, even according to Jesus, why do we spend all this time on Revelation? Why don't we have 1 Corinthians 13 seminars about how the importance of love instead of Revelation seminars?
Sigve, there's an open invitation for further convincing arguments.
Well, I do not agree that Revelation has been, I agree that Revelation has been used very much, and that it has been used in, yes, Revelation seminars and in a kind of apologetic, Adventist apologetics, and in some ways also to drill certain Adventist doctrines. The enormous interest in this book by some of the best New Testament scholars the last 20, 30 years have largely passed the Adventist church by. So one has repeated the understanding one always had of Revelation and used it. I think in 2019 there was a Sabbath school lessons devoted to Revelation. It was the same old stuff. It was deliberately ignoring these other readings. And let me just say it, you can say it 100 different times, but I will say it very simplistically, that the best form of apologetics is good exegesis. And Adventist readings have bypassed good exegesis for apologetic purposes. That has been a very big mistake and has in some ways led to the kind of aversion. If I may, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe you aren't completely aversive to Revelation, but it has to some extent led to Revelation aversion, especially in academic communities. I thought it was pretty remarkable when Randy Roberts last year started doing a series on Revelation. That was unusual for the Loma Linda community, and I think he did a very, very good job. But there has been, in some ways, Revelation aversion among established Adventists because it hasn't seemed completely credible. If you take Bocham's thing about the amazing literary artistry and all those things he says of Revelation, it will be worthy of study by the most sophisticated people among us.
Ed, are you satisfied, or do you still need more concrete examples of why Revelation should be a centerpiece of what we preach? Inquiring minds, Sigve.
No, I just think we haven't really scratched the surface, because serious exegetical reading of Revelation we have been amiss in that, but of course one has to win some of those exegetical battles. I have to win the battle for a cosmic perspective rather than Roman, for revelation rather than retribution. These things that do lead to completely different conclusions. So these are, this is not something that is, one has to discuss these and study it and see where the evidence leads. But
okay, we'll take it for now. There will be more questions, I'm sure. Lauren, you couldn't hold out any longer.
Hey,
Let us in.
excellent class. Thank you so much. I actually think that you're saying that we have developed an aversion to revelation among a certain subset of us is not too strong. I think that's an accurate description, and I would say it describes me. I started out in my ministry doing revelation seminars. I rather quickly learned that we pull revelation seminars were a few texts pulled out of context in order to prove Adventist doctrines. It was not a study of revelation. It was an excuse to teach the Sabbath and state of the dead and things like that. I think you could probably, the average person who teaches on Revelation probably uses 1/8 of the book at the most, from what I can tell. In fact, if you look for any reference to the trumpets, even in Ellen White's writing, she never addresses the trumpets. Most people don't. So a few years ago, had a prayer meeting group that wanted to study Revelation. So I asked one of my elderly friends, I said, how do I best study Revelation? He said, well, there's a lot of good stuff to study Revelation, but he said, if you want to know the truth, Seventh-day Adventist doctrine on Revelation is still governed by Uriah Smith. He said, and this may cause you to identify who the guy is. He said, I wrote some things on applying futurism to the trumpets, and he said, I have not been able to ever get them published. Pacific Press won't touch them because Uriah Smith governs that teaching, that set of teachings governs how we understand Revelation. And he said, that's it. So I went with it. I took Uriah Smith and I studied it, and I found it a pathetic commentary on understanding. And the stuff that he cited and the jumps that he made just didn't make any sense to me, and they still don't. One of my friends who was listening in on this, he said he gave a different fork in the road. He said, what I'm starting to wonder is Revelation intentionally crafted and written under inspiration? Or the other fork in the road would be, is this the guy that got slipped a psilocybin mushroom and started having some hallucinations and wrote them all down as he was religiously obsessed? You know, after reading it for myself and trying to make sense out of it from the context, I wasn't completely averse to his interpretation of it. So I ask you, is Revelation carefully and intentionally crafted to be as it is? Is it put together by a sane person who was trying to express something about the cosmic conflict? Or is it a bipolar who happened to be on the high side of his bipolarism at that moment, or something else? I have to say, I don't find it as essential anymore as I was told it was once I realized how weak the Adventist arguments were. I'll just lay that on you.
So a couple of things for perspective. So Is there anything about the trumpets in the writings of Ellen G. White? There is. In the great controversy, in the fifth and sixth trumpet, they are from the Revelation chapter 9. She adopts the view of the pioneers, also the view of Uriah Smith, that seems to lead to a date, August 11, 1840. That is a date in the traditional original Adventist interpretation that would, at the time, that would describe the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, because Uriah Smith and other Adventists used to think that the fifth and the sixth trumpet describe Islam. It's the rise of Islam, and it is first the Arabs and then the Ottomans. And the climax there in Revelation 9, and there is a timeline for it, and that timeline seems to be endorsed in the book of Great Controversy, leading to August 1840. So these are highly problematic interpretations. They simply do not work. So around 1970 at the seminary at Andrews, Hans Larondel came from Europe and took America by storm and became one of the professors at the seminary at Andrews. And they basically threw out much of that Uriah Smith stuff. But certainly they did not. Larondel first, and then John Pauline, and then Ranko Stefanovic, and others who have been in the center of things in teaching Revelation and the Adventist Church. They abandoned many of those Uriah Smith's things and adopted some other events, for the trumpets and so on. Mm-hmm. So I do not think that Uriah Smith works as exegesis. But Uriah Smith, he had an agenda. He was interested in religious liberty and other things, and had, a kind of negative view of the Catholics for that reason. But Larondel brought into, I'm sorry if I mention names here, and maybe I should anonymize it a little, but now I have mentioned names, so let it stand. He was also interested in some of those historical issues that interested Uriah Smith. But the theology of divine retribution that has been taught to Adventist pastors at the seminary got much worse after 1970. Mm-hmm. It was much less a feature of Adventist interpretations until our man from Europe came and did some moves there, because I have looked to the older interpretations, and they do not pursue theology that much. They pursue history. Uriah Smith writes, prophecy is prophecy of history. That's it. But with Larondel, it's more sophisticated. He wants to do theology. But in my view, the theology is worse. So how is that for the record? So well, he's gone. I do not think that any of those suspicions about John. Yes, you can use Jung and you can use Nietzsche and all those things, but I use Bauckham and I use Austin Farrer, who gave the Gifford lectures of all things. That is the most prestigious thing you can do in the UK. And these people, they see an extremely sane person, highly educated and literarily sophisticated, laying out a vision of how, it were sort of climax of prophecy. That's what Bauckham calls it. And to me, they are too weak from my taste on the cosmic perspective. But in terms of respecting the composition of this book, it is amazing, and it is the book in the New Testament that is most at the same literary level as the book of Job in the Old Testament.
Oh, thank you. You answered my question.
Thank you. Richard, you're up next. Tell us, where are you from? Tell us a little bit about yourself. I don't think I know you.
Yeah, you don't know me. I'm Richard Sembera. I come from Uganda.
Thank you.
Though
Well,
I'm based in Congo, Brazzaville.
super. Thank you.
So
What's on your mind?
thank you.
Been prompted by the master.
Firstly, I must thank Thomas. Thomas is we have a Telegram group, Seventh-day Adventist Telegram group. So every Sabbath he shares a link of this, and I don't know if there are other people who joined from there, but he has done a great effort there. I want to thank him. Yeah. So I also want to thank the presenter for the wonderful presentation. I must admit that God works in mysterious ways. Because earlier this week I was frustrated because the subject of the book of Revelation is something personal for me. So there are certain conclusions that I've come to at this level, and there are certain several, of course, missing pieces like everyone else. But the presenter presents something very important. Firstly, I have come to conclude that I think the book of Revelation reveals the Bible. So you like it is that's why like God is so wise to error. So that's why it's at the very end, because it actually reveals the Bible. And without it, there are pieces in the Bible that are missing for our time. You know, things that happened in the past that had great significance that we cannot, you know, like for example, when Abraham is going to die, so God tells him what will happen to his people. So, and then he says these words that the sin, like the sin of the Ammonites has not yet been completed. Something like the statement is, I don't know how to quote it exactly. And then in the New Testament, they have a language they use of the fullness of time. So in the book of Revelation, for example, he talks about the 144, which are the first fruits of God. Then on the contrary, shortly after, he talks about an angel coming to reap the fruits, and he says, come and reap the fruit, for the fruits of the earth are ready, you know, and then the grapes are put into the wine press and they are pressed. And this is supposed to reveal the anger of God. But it shows that, well, the righteousness of the righteous has grown to, because the 144 called the first fruits of God. On the contrary, sin at the very end of time should also have reached its limit before Jesus Christ should come, for example. So you see the consistency of God from the Old Testament. But the presenter presents to us some new idea, which I really, because like I said, I've been making my study, but earlier this last week, I was really frustrated because I was like, okay, this is so complicated. I don't even know where this works. You know, but because I had an idea, I had like it's an idea, or I had a perspective which I was adopting, but I found no justification for it. And the presenter has presented time or word. Now, I beg to differ that I think the sweet spot is in the middle, because you see at the end, when Revelation is coming to an end, the name that is revealed of Jesus Christ is the Word of God. So my question is, what if actually the book of Revelation is not written to reveal what will happen to the world, but rather what will happen to the Word in terms of the gospel? Because in the first 3 chapters, he introduces what will happen to the 7 churches, and then he says, come, and I'll show you what will happen after. So he's shown a series of events, and then a mighty angel comes with a little book, tells him to eat it, and then tells him, you must prophesy. Now, immediately, when he finishes this scene, he sees himself in a temple and he's measuring. They ask him, measure the temple and measure the people worshiping in the temple. And he measures, and then he reaches the courtyard. It's like, yeah, leave out that, because it was given for the Gentiles. Now, and they will stamp on this temple, they will stamp in the courtyard for all this time. So, but if you're following, for example, like for me, when I think about it, I think it is showing us what will happen to the gospel that the Lord had left to the apostles, you know, and the challenges that it must go through. And you know, of course, versus time. So these components are moving together, because then with this assumption, for example, you see that after the gospel is taken out of Israel, it goes to the Gentiles. But it doesn't seem like all the Gentiles really entered the temple to worship. many of them stamped the courtyard, explain the confusion that we have in Christianity today. So what I want to ask the presenter, one, is don't you think that actually you don't supposed to take right or left, but this is a very like a consideration of these two factors playing together, how time and the word are playing out? That is my first question. My next is if, for example, if
I think I have to interrupt you because you are putting a lot of stuff out there. So you have I think we need to just limit it a little if you could.
I'm sorry, I'm really sorry.
So, Sigve, could you respond to that first question?
No, I will respond mostly to say that you have shared, Richard has shared a perspective from his own study, and I respect that. I think that is nice that you have shared that. Then I will say just one thing about the temporal horizon that we assume for revelation. When Jesus, or the lamb that was killed with violence, goes and takes the book that is sealed with 7 seals and break the seals, he proceeds to break the seals. And there is a white horse, there is a red horse, there is a black horse, and there is a sickly green horse. One of the British interpreters say that we are poised, we are expecting something really new to be shown to us. There is the horse of war, there is the horse of famine, there is the horse of death and suffering. And then he says, out of these seals come calamities that are as old as the human race. There is nothing new. So to read these, the book of sealed with 7 seals, as though it is primarily showing us a future that we had no idea existed, that doesn't work, because the realities that are depicted there are very familiar realities. And you can then read that for another reason than as a prediction about the future, rather to read it as though Jesus is dealing with issues familiar to us and in some ways unsealing them to give us a new perspective, a different understanding of those realities. Everything has to be rethought, in my view, from these usual time-centered interpretations that have dominated among Adventists.
That's quite a challenge, Sigve. Thank you. It's a big one to challenge us. Olive Hemmings, I'm delighted that you're tuned in. Tell me what you need to get Sigve to admit to.
I don't want Sigve to admit to anything. I first of all want to say, Sigve, I so much appreciate your very disciplined approach to revelation. I don't agree with everything, but I find it to be the most disciplined, and to me, the approach that I generally take to revelation. This futuristic or futurist, as they refer to it, and approach, I just don't buy in. When I was in Jamaica, I was teaching at the university there. I taught Revelation for 1 semester, and I decided I will not teach it anymore because I don't want Revelation for me to be Adventist theology. Because even now, here at my university, we teach Revelation and we label it RELB, as though it's a Bible course. And I was just speaking with my colleagues that perhaps we need to take the B off. RELB means it's coming from biblically, because that's not how it's taught at all. More RELT, that it's really Adventist theology. So yeah, I do not in any way want to teach Revelation because I cannot approach it in those ways. So I definitely understand that, Sigve. So I really, really love this very disciplined approach to it, and I wish that you could present it more often among Seventh-day Adventist circles. Well, as I say, I don't agree with everything. But what I'm observing, and I think we have spoken already, Sigve, about the Roman and the cosmic. And my question is, I don't know why it has to be one or the other. I am observing in your presentation that perhaps you want to minimize the Roman view due to your aversion to the retributive approach. I don't know if I'm wrong or right. You know.
Yeah.
What do you think, Sigve?
So, yeah, first of all, we have to have full disclosure here. Olive and I are friends, so we do the best we can to support each other, and and I am very admiring of what Olive is doing, including her use of revelation, because I have been exposed to that. So yes, my project is different because from much of the preterist community, because I do think that the cosmic conflict story and the whole sort of sweep of Revelation's vision is critical. When I wrote my dissertation at St. Andrews, I was struggling to get traction for my project. So I began my book, Saving God's Reputation, in chapter 20, because in chapter 20, all the other actors are gone. The beast of that beast and that beast are gone. There is only the devil left. It's the ancient serpent. And the last 3 chapters of Revelation, in some ways, parallel in reverse the first 3 chapters in Genesis. There is the serpent in Genesis 3 and the serpent in Revelation 20. And then there is the new earth in chapter 21 and 22. And the imagery depicting how the world is restored is very much recapitulating the beginning of the canon. So the climax of prophecy idea of Ockham, that in some ways you almost think that the writer of the book of Revelation knew that his book would be the last one in the canon. It is quite successful that way. It is actually quite appropriate, and canonical readings do make a point of that. I think your interest and your concern and your campaign for social justice and so on, that Revelation is your ally in that regard. There is, very significant imagery in Revelation 18. There is conspicuous consumption. There is the economy of the 1%, and the others who are deprived. There is trade in goods that someone has said that nobody needs and few can afford, that kind of economic system. There is trade in human lives. There is slave trade. And all of that comes under indictment in Revelation. So Revelation 18 is the economic and critique of that you have in the book, and surely that works as an anti-imperial message in situations like our own too. And then, of course, in the end of that chapter 18, in you was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who have been slain in the history of the earth. So that is also a kind of indictment of violence, all who have been killed by violence through the earth. So I don't think I need to try to persuade others to adopt my sort of holistic, if I may say so, idea. Take what you can, and you, as a crusader or a champion of social justice, will certainly find the Book of Revelation an ally to your concerns.
Courage, Olive. Courage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, very disciplined answer.
Yes, it's
Thank
true.
you.
Eduardo, you are up. What's on your mind? Share.
Thank you. Sigve, I saw something on Revelation from my pastor, Randy, and he make it like the word soon, and he repeated it 3 times, soon, 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 like he was tired of that word. And I have a question for you. When Jesus said on Revelation 22, I come soon, do you think that any race, generation, language can understand the word soon when Revelation tells you about more than 1,000 years, like 1260 years, 1260 years? Can any human being can understand soon, meaning that it'll pass more than 1,000 years? And why don't we use the word immediately? Because Jesus in Matthew 24:29 said, immediately after the tribulation of those days. Why don't we use the word immediately? That means after something is going to happen. So what do you think about the word soon? Because my pastor make it almost fun of that word.
Well, first I will say you should always listen to your pastor. And no, it's nice to see you. And I will say that the word soon can also be translated quickly. And it can mean that there is a kind of wish on the part of the person speaking to us to hasten things, but it isn't, the concept of soon, of course, is so tenuous that it has lost all meaning. Soon has lost all meaning if you think that you have read this book now for 2,000 years. So one has to think about it more in relation to a disposition on the part of the speaker, that he is, not tuned out. He's not indifferent to the plight of humanity. So in my own teaching of the book, I have said that the most important time phrase, the most important temporal phrase in Revelation is one that isn't there. It isn't in the book of Revelation, but the most important one is in the meantime, because Revelation is also a book called to vocational book. That the Spirit and the bride, they say, come. And that is a vocational vision. It's something you do in the meantime, that you are busy in the world and witnessing in the world. And if any, then so that's what we do in the meantime. And prophecy is a risky thing because it can lead to people becoming fatalistic, that something will turn out well even if we do nothing. Or it can make them militant, it can make them militaristic, that we kind of implement the will of God by violent means. That is also a risk of prophecy. That's the risk of the prophecies of Marx and Lenin and so on, who implement their vision of what they think the history is leading to. And Adventists have fallen for those too. We are in some ways dogmatic and in some ways fatalistic. But if we make the time phrase in the meantime the most important, then we will preserve a kind of vocational tenor that book is trying to inscribe. And I think that would be a good corrective.
Thank you, Sigve. I think also that if we take the context as being more about name or nominative than time, then in the meantime makes more logical and compelling sense. Thank you. I'm going to read a question for Richard Ferguson. He has a hardware problem. He can't send his own in to do it. So Try this on. How is Christian evangelism impacted by your version of Revelation? Now, he asked a sub-question about the two witnesses of Revelation and Zechariah. You have thoughts on that? But the biggest question is, how is Christian evangelism impacted by your view of Revelation?
Well, I would have liked to meet Richard because I think he has actually paid my presentations on YouTube respect and watched them and given me some feedback, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're quite correct.
So the two witnesses in Revelation 11 it's a very interesting picture, because the two figures there are resemble Moses and Elijah. They are the most masculine figures in the Old Testament. Moses, who can, with the plagues of Egypt, and Elijah, who can shut up the sky and it doesn't rain. So these two figures in Revelation 11 are compelling Old Testament figures. They are modeled on those two figures. But at the end of their witness, as they have bring their witness to completion, the beast from the bottomless pit, and in my view, that is the evil one himself, comes up, wages war against them, wages war and kills them, and they lie unburied for 3.5 days. They lie in the street in the city, in the middle of the city. And there is a rejoicing in the world, and people are sending gifts to each other. This is great because they felt harassed by those witnesses. And then after 3.5 days, those witnesses come to life, and they stand on their feet, and they hear a voice from heaven saying, "Come up here." And they go up in heaven, just like the ascension of Jesus. And when the world sees that, and this is under the influence of Zechariah, if you read the background text in the Old Testament, then there is what is virtually a conversion of the nations. There is a turning to God, a dramatic turning to God. And what was it who did it? What made the difference? It was the recapitulation of the story of Jesus in the life of the believing community. It is witness as embodiment. It is the embodied witness of the believing community as it recapitulates the story of Jesus. So for evangelism, this has enormous consequences, because Adventists like the three angels in Revelation 14 a lot better than the two witnesses in Revelation 11. But those chapters of mission in Revelation 11, mission in Revelation 14, they are complementary. And the success of Revelation 11, describing the embodied witness of the community, is hugely consequential and has not really taken hold in certainly not in Adventist circles, as far as I can tell. So I think that's a great question and a good place to go. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Sigve. Robert Johnston, I think you are up next. You are set to go. Contribute.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say I really appreciate Sigve's contribution to the study of Revelation and biblical studies generally. You're a great scholar, and I will always lament that we were not successful in bringing you to the seminary. Olive Hemmings partly anticipated my question. I think it was Torkild Jacobsen that said that the cosmic and the earthly were kind of the events that happened in heaven and the events that happened on earth were kind of corresponding, that one caused the other or corresponded to the other. If my city conquered your city, it's because my God defeated your God, and so forth. So the question is, your fork in the road forcing us to choose between Roman or cosmic, isn't that forced? Does it have to be either or? Can't it be both and? Does your approach obviate the preterist interpretation? And it's hard for me to imagine serious exegesis without, if I may use the term, a preterist base. So my question is a little bit like aiming olives, but maybe forcing it a little bit.
And I'm always happy to see you. I am so in awe of what you have done, and that you are still engaged with our communities and sharing your thoughts. It is really amazing. So sure, you don't have to say it's either or, but I am not the one saying either or. The other side says that. It's the preterists who do either or, because there is no sort of cosmic evil, or no, that story is in some ways only a metaphor. It is a rhetorical amplification of the sort of Roman realities, and you demonize it just to make your rhetoric more effective. But there are no demons. There is no demonic cosmic reality, so you can certainly make some things work. The preterist readings of the first half of Revelation are quite weak. The preterist readings get stronger when you get to chapters 12, 13, 14. And the most important chapter for preterists is the same that has been the most important for Adventists. It's Revelation 13. It's the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. Those are very specific in the preterist readings. They are the Roman Empire and Emperor Nero. And they are the imperial cult in Asia Minor. That's the beast from the earth. Those are very specific in the preterist readings. So this is a problem, because I don't agree with that. I do not want to adopt that the myth of Nero's return is a controlling element for the story in Revelation. You have to have something bigger than that. So I have to engage with that, and I wrote an article in the Adventist in the Andrews University Seminary Studies some years ago about that issue, and why I think it should be something, why that is not completely persuasive. But for other things, you can do Roman things. I mentioned Revelation 18. Now, let me do one more thing. This is quite an important issue you are raising, so I am happy to try to make the most of the opportunity. The preterist readers, they tend to say that when you transition in Revelation from the earth to heaven in chapter 4, after the messages to the 7 churches, where John has described quite a turbulent, complex, imperfect reality on earth. Then the preterist vision, and this is R.H. Charles, and this is also one of the more Chris Rowland in the UK, very outstanding Revelation scholars. They say when you transition from earth to heaven, you go from earthly chaos, earthly turmoil, to heavenly calm. You go, heaven is exactly what you think it should be. Everything is great. There is no problem in heaven. But I think that is very flawed, and there are interpreters, fortunately, who see that problem. You do not go from earthly turmoil, earthly chaos, to heavenly peace and calm. You go from earthly chaos to heavenly chaos. There is a problem in heaven. Heaven is supposed to be the solution to our problems, but in Revelation, it isn't. The heavenly council, there is a serious problem. I have that from Adele Arbor Collins, no less. So So you cannot, I can make concessions, and I can agree with some of the preterist readings, and I'm actually quite happy with the way they do political critique of preterism. I share it. I think it is valid. But but I do not think that the preterist exegesis is robust enough for the kind of cosmic perspective that you have in Revelation. And I mentioned that transition to heaven in chapters 4 and 5, and the way the preterists see the beast from the earth and the beast from the sea. I do not see those, and I don't see the Adventist view entirely correct either. So that I do not think that the head that was wounded in Revelation 13 is the papacy, is the Pope that was wounded in 1798 and comes back a few years later. That doesn't work either. Right. But a cosmic perspective works and can be a corrective to all of those problems.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you, Robert. Ian Hartley, you're up. Where are you from and what's your question?
Yeah, I'm part of the Frozen Chosen. I live in Canada.
Excellent.
Before I go ahead, I think Emmanuel was ahead of me.
Well, we had a little glitch here. If you would go ahead, we will get to Emmanuel, I promise.
Okay.
Thank you for your concern.
So I resonate with Sigve's presentation. The question of agency is huge. It is why the neo-atheists take religion to task about who caused all the horrific stories in the Old Testament. And Revelation is a correction to that in the line of Jesus teaching on the existence of a supernatural evil being, which was quite new to our teaching. Prior to Jesus, we blamed everything on God. So agency is huge. And Revelation, when it's read as revelation rather than retribution, backs up what Jesus was saying and gives us insights that can combat the attribution of evil to God. It's huge in my mind. Thank you, Sigve.
Well, I have to say thank you to you, because you said that so well, and that is huge. Yes, agency is enormous, is extremely consequential. In Revelation, Jesus is defined, and God is defined through Jesus, through the image of the Lamb that was killed with violence. He has fallen in battle. He was killed with violence. It isn't just, as a sacrifice in the temple by the priest. And he was killed with violence from the foundation of the world. That is what Revelation 13 says. So yes, I thank you for you sharing that. That was very, very helpful.
Good. Thank you. I like that. Emmanuel, you've been very patient.
Thank you, Dr. Tonstad. I was born in a Seventh-day Adventist home. I witnessed dozens of seminars, Daniel and Revelation. Not once I witnessed a seminar on the love of God, the grace of God, and the gospel. Your presentation was long overdue, and I really appreciate your presentation. However, I have a big problem, because for us Adventists, the book of Revelation defines our soteriology, our eschatology, our ecclesiology, our identity, how it is possible for us to do a good apologetic / a good exegesis when we have an elephant in the room who have all the answers. I was talking about Auntie Ellen.
Yeah, no, so I totally agree with you. Of course, that Adventist identity is very much based on the books Daniel and Revelation, and I think that a reorientation in the way we read these books is not it's inescapable. We cannot escape it. We cannot. It will happen at some point, and I'm hopeful that some of the perspectives that have been important to me will be maybe valued at some point. I think if we were to make the switch, the book could be even more useful to Adventist identity formation than it is now, because our time and event-centered orientation doesn't really say much about God. That isn't why we do it. It is to say something about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It is to put us on the map, to make us a subject in the book of Revelation. So if we switch from a time and event-centered reading to a name-centered reading, God as the person who is revealed to us in this book, we will have more reason to use the book, and it will be much better for our witness too, and for our sense of identity. So I totally agree with you about your description of the problem, and I am saying that I think we can. We'll just have to hope that the change we are talking about is possible.
Let me ask you a question. Do you expect to see a change in your lifetime?
Well,
look at the tea leaf. Just look at the tea leaf.
Well, so I do. I cannot. I don't want to do expectation management here. I want to say that the appeal of reading this book and of using these guideposts that I mentioned, the 3 guideposts, rereader, Old Testament, God is not the only one, that if one can do some of those things, you will be, the prospect of persuading people could actually happen. That is, I give that to Adventists, that they tend to be interested in the Bible and tend to be interested in how to study the Bible. So I have to believe that there is a possibility of a kind of opening that is not institutionally happening right now. Institutionally, right now we are on lockdown, but I don't let that get to me. I want to, Revelation is an open book, even if Adventist channels of communication aren't open exactly. So let's just continue. I got to present this to you in this wonderful group. That is pretty amazing. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Lauren, before we get to Florin, who is next and is unmuted, would you like to say something about upcoming seminars and perhaps offer our closing prayer for today? And we'll continue it when you're finished.
Yeah, we always keep going after we have the closing prayer. So just so you know, those of you who have your hands up, we'll finish with that. And I need to do a check here on what Daryl is going to be presenting for us next week. This is a new teacher for us, Daryl Gungadu. And I know that he has done a lot of research on religious experiences, a sort of phenomenology approach, and religious experiences in religions around the world having to do with substance use and things like that, such as peyote and things, that sort of thing. Now, how he's going to blend that in, I've got to check before I tell you, and I will tell you before you all leave today.
All right. Why don't you
he is a Seventh Adventist guy, and it sounds far out, but it actually focuses in on us and what we do. But let me have a prayer.
Right.
Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for wonderful teachers like Dr. Tonstad. I want to thank you for this class and the folks that are gathered here. I pray, Lord, that you will continue to bless them with the insight that comes from your Spirit. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. I'll be back with you in just a moment here.
Great, thanks. Lauren, thank you for your patience. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say and your reaction.
Sure. I'd like to thank you first, Dr. Tonstad, for the passion you have for revelation. This is important. I was one of John Pauline's students, and I remember every class I got to it, Professor Pauline, I thought was a delight. So he was able to bring the revelation alive in our eyes, in our minds. So that's what I'm feeling right now. I have to realize that this particular meeting here has an academic settings. So here are people who cares about that, people who are educated, who had a passion to look more. So it's not a regular Adventist meeting, but it's a one with a special people. So I'm moving from this academic level to a practical question for you today, related with the efficiency of the Revelation, book of Revelation, and the Revelation as a concept in our mission as a Protestant denomination. So question looks like that. What percentage of Seventh-day Adventists, 20 million plus, the membership of the church, understand the book of Revelation, and with a simple Bible in their hands, they can approach a person and can point with the scripture verses in few minutes how the Bible speaks about, for example, I'll take just one from how the Bible speaks about October 22, 1844, just to give share that with someone. I see this percentage very, very low, very small. I don't suggest that the church is filled with I like to use a not so strong word, but they say with the stupid people. No, I value every brothers and sister into Adventism, and I think we need to. We love them as a principle, and we don't question that. But according with my personal observation, work as a pastor for more than 20 years in North American Division here, since I relocate, this percentage of the people understanding the revelation and precisely our historicist view, it's not increasing but decreasing in Adventism. So in the short or long term, what are the benefits to rely on the teaching that it's only understood by a minority, an elite, while the vast majority of the members will learn and repeats a poem, and which is not theirs, and they do it because they want to submit their understanding to the knowledgeable brothers, and they wanted to prove their obedience in something they do not understand. So what's the purpose to continue to do something only a small segment can get it and can prove it? It takes mathematics skills, putting here, there, compiling. Today on the Sabbath school, we had 1,260 days, and I had few people. I was visiting with a church. After that, some people said, okay, how can we, I don't have a clue what is that all about. So what's the benefit of continuing to have that one while a minority know to prove it while the majority has no clue? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I don't think there is a benefit to continuing that, and that is exactly my point, that you have to change. That historicist curriculum, that one of my figures, he sat on top of a pile of books, and the same thing in the preterist curriculum, that there is a curriculum for the first century history, and the Adventist curriculum, there is a much bigger sort of historical curriculum. The ordinary Adventist cannot master that, and will not, and have never mastered it. That's why I said that Revelation is a book we understand vicariously. We understand it because La Rondelle understood it, and Don Pauline understands it, and other people understand it, and they can explain it for us. But I do not agree with that. I do not think that the extracurricular reading that is required for Revelation is history. It is the Old Testament primarily, and to see how the Old Testament brings meaning to this language that is so elusive and so artistic. And if we do that, I predict that we can graduate from our sort of codependency on experts and actually become more independent and say, so is there a time period for the second rider, the rider on the red horse? Is that a certain time period in history, or is it a reality, a feature of human reality? The famine, is the famine a period in history, or is it human reality? And then death and Hades that follows the fourth rider, is that a certain period in history? I think we have totally undersold what is possible here, and we have in some ways created a sense of what should I say, helplessness as readers, because we have kind of mandated, we have said it needs to be these historical events. It's very difficult to do 538 by historical sources. It is even difficult to do 1798 with historical sources. These are not easily given. So in some ways you can say that Adventist expositors, they benefit from the subservience, the willingness of their church members to believe what they say. And we are also preying on the ignorance of people in general, because they don't know much about history. They've never heard about Justinian or Belisarius or Berthier or all those things that you need to master. And we have sort of given them the feeling that if they mastered at least those rudiments, then we are fine. But history is so much more complex that our decision to go that route has been ill-advised. And I am saying that we shouldn't go there. I'm saying that we should. Yes, there is one reading requirement you will not escape, and that is reading the Old Testament. When you become a rereader of Revelation, you also become a rereader of the rest of the Bible. And I cannot offer a quick fix to that one, because Revelation is in some ways like a zip file, that you have to open the zip file and it expands when you open the file. That is the way these Old Testament allusions work. So I think my project is a project of liberation and getting out from under that kind of codependency that we have inculcated in our churches.
That's a challenge to us all. Thank you. Chiarasola, am I pronouncing that fairly well? Tell us more about
all
it.
right, yes.
Yeah, thank you. What's your question?
Kai Arasola is the real Finnish way, but never mind. I appreciate what Dr. Tonstad has told us, and I have a short question. I've tried for years already to change in our Old Testament interpretation of Daniel from time to theology. And I just wanted to ask, I'm sure he has thought about it, but would he be ready to give us a few pointers on how it could be done?
Open invitation.
Well, I'm very happy to see you, because I don't think I have ever seen you in person, and I see you virtually now, but I have been aware of your work and your publications and the sort of the wish to instill a little more sobriety to our approach. I'm not mistaking. I have benefited from what you have done. Are you asking me about the book of Daniel, or are you letting me stay in the book of Revelation?
No, Daniel, I thought if you have any ideas, you would be ready to share.
Yeah, so let me try to do just one thing then. At the end of the book of Daniel in chapter 12, there is a man who is dressed in linen talking to someone else. They are two angelic figures as far as I can tell. And one of them is saying, when is the end of all these things? When will be the end of all these wonders? And then the man who is dressed in linen raises his hand to the sky and says, time, 2 times, and half a time. Then all these, when the power of the holy people is completely broken, then the end of those things, then it will be the end. Before we get to that point in Daniel chapter 12, we have read that at some point Michael will stand up, and there will be a time of trouble such as never was, and those who sleep in the dust will arise, and those who, the redeemed will be shining, and those who are not redeemed will be ashamed, And then comes that angel's question, when will be the end of these things? So that time phrase, that time element, time, 2 times, and half a time, if you begin in Daniel chapter 12, you have to read it symbolically and comprehensively. This is the whole period. This is the end of all things. It isn't 538 or 1798, even in Daniel. That's but I have just finished a chapter. I'm working on a manuscript, and I have kind of finished, and we'll see if it gets published. But I do have some things on that point. I also think that there is a pedagogical challenge for the time-centered issues that we also have to talk about. But I do think that the case for a name-centered reading or theology rather than time or history is exegetically correct. Yes,
that gentle reminder. Thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Ed Zerkwitz, good to see you today.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. So I know we're running out of time. So what I'm going to say is that the things I learned from doing Daniel and Revelation studies years ago are totally inapplicable for me now with everything that's happening in the world. I mean, we have we have cyber attacks all over the place. Like just about anything where there's a computer can be affected. We have nuclear war possibilities. We have the way war is fought is so different nowadays. Drones and financial wars and etc. Everything is so upside down. Bank accounts can be frozen, like in Canada where I live. On and on and on. So my question for you Mr. Tonstad, is how do we take the last several chapters of prophecy and try to apply that to our world today?
Well, I'm very happy for your question, because yes, how do we do that? And we don't do it if we continue the way we have done it. The last dates where we have a sort of event, corresponding event to a date that we claim is significant, either 1798, that one is pretty well established, or you can go to 1840 to the interpretation of Uriah Smith for the fifth and sixth trumpet. The 20th century isn't present in Adventist interpretations of prophecy, and the 20th century, which is probably the most violent, the most horrible century of all human history, with the Holocaust and Hiroshima and all of those things, that part of history never made it into a sort of Adventist conscience, Adventist agenda. So, but the way I see it, and the cosmic conflict view, then the symbolism of a text like Revelation showing a demonic reality at work in the trumpets and later in the bowls, will not be stymied by history. It will be quite as successful. I would say Revelation is quite successful at depicting historical horror, and is doing it much, much better if you don't do the way, the historical interpretations and the claims that we have tended to do. So I think the text is adequate for our needs, but not the way we have read it.
Thank you. Good. Lena Taves, where are you calling from? Thank you. And what's your question today?
I don't have a question. I have an observation. I teach at Union College in Lincoln, Nebraska. And as we're discussing all of these topics, I'm thinking of the new generation and the new approaches. And I feel like in the New Testament studies, we are talking a lot about narrative approach. And I feel like I have gone through years of Adventist schooling. I appreciate Dr. Johnston and all the wisdom that he has shared with me over the years, including my PhD program. I feel like we're not paying enough attention to the narrative, something that Sigve has been doing a lot in his commentary. I've read it, I've presented it. And I feel like our task now is really pay attention to the text and the internal voice of the text. And that's the way to determine, maybe along with history, not totally disregarding the history, but along with his history and historical events. I think some of the literary approaches have not been developed, and like the narrative theory, speech act theories, we haven't really looked into it in our schools and our institutions. And I feel this is the way to go for the future. And of course, the academic freedom is a big thing, at least in my classes, and presenting alternative views on the same topics to my students, and not only one one-sided view. So we want to raise good and open-minded thinkers rather than produce cookie cutters, and eventually they figure it out.
Perfect.
It's just, thank you. Thank you.
That's quite an endorsement. And we would love to have your students tune in to Adventist Today seminar. It's a great group. Thank you for what you do.
Sigve. I just want to say hi to Lena, because we are friends. And I was, until last year, the president for a year for the Adventist Society for Religious Studies, and Lena is the current president for this year. And this fall, there will be the theme for this year's meetings in San Diego will be the Holy Spirit, and it looks like it's going to be a very interesting conference. So, yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you say about how to read it. How we have, in some ways, stripped the text of its beauty, of its tantalizing features. Revelation seminars, it's the worst you can do to this book, is to do seminar, because it is a text that is asking to be performed. I have wanted the University Church in Loma Linda to perform it as a church event, with all the voices, 24 living creatures, 24 elders, the whole thing, the heavenly council, all the voices and all the music and all the shouting and singing and silence. If we do that, the task of interpretation will in some ways have been accomplished already by the performance. You will not have to do so much didactic, contortions as we have had to do. So
that would be glorious.
Listening to the Spirit along with all of this.
You're
here. Thank you.
Clarence, I think you're our last one, and then Lauren's going to have an announcement or two to make. But Clarence, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And it's a very short question. I'd like to ask you, Doctor, can we point to any sure, certain, none to be contested knowledge gleaned from the study of Revelation? Or have we simply been engaging and are still engaging in holy speculation? Question.
No, well, I think we have engaged in speculation, and I think the use of Revelation to say again and again that Jesus is coming soon is a sort of cop out from the sense of this book is that more and more things happen that the end is not coming as soon as one thought. But I think as to certainty, maybe we can end on that one. The rider on the white horse, he has a name that no one knows but himself. So he is a figure who has self-knowledge and no one knows him. And he is a mediator of revelation, because the next verse says that he has, it says he has a name that no one knows, and then it says, and his name is the word of God, Logos to Theo. It is the revealer of God. So what you can know with certainty, if I may pick up on how you put that question, is that God sent Jesus into this world to reveal him to us, to make it possible for us to know what God is like. And this figure who came into the world as a revealer had to come on a white horse as a warrior, because there is a battle going on about God's character and reputation. It isn't just ignorance of God that is the problem in the world. It is God being misrepresented, yes. God being smeared and slandered. And so the rider on the white horse comes to set the record straight. He has a name that no one knows, because it is true. No one knows what he is like. That is the truth. But he succeeds in revealing himself, revealing his name to us and revealing God to us. And the most sharply focused image of that knowledge is the lamb that was killed with violence in chapter 5, who appears in the middle of the heavenly council. So yes, there is certain knowledge, and there is knowledge of the name, and there is even the idea that we shall see his face and his name shall be on our foreheads.
Awesome. I am challenged. I'm excited as you are, I can tell. I look forward to that day, and may all of us accept your challenge of spreading this gospel